peas that we sowed around mid-February are now ready to be planted outside. So this is the dwarf variety, and then this is the tall variety that we've sown. So you can see they're quite different side by side, but they're both absolutely fine to be planted out now. If you haven't joined in with this grow along yet, there is still absolutely plenty of time. Check out the first video, this is video 4, and it will give you more information of how long you've got to actually join in, and then we'll be doing a later sowing as well in July of the dwarf varieties. So before planting out your peas, the first thing we really want to do is to start looking at hardening these off. So I have already done mine. I'm going to be popping mine into some pots today and then have some left over to plant out in the garden. I was planning to plant them all into the garden rather than in pots, but as you know, we have a young pup and the chances are he will be starting to eat these and pull them out and all sorts, so we'll see how they go. How much you need to harden off is really going to depend on how they've been grown and how sheltered they've been. These have been in my polytunnel, and then they've also had some wind as well, so they've been having direct sunlight as well as some wind coming in. So for me, I just needed to harden them off for a couple of days, just get them used to more of the wind from outside. The temperature in the polytunnel does go up and down quite a lot through day and night, so they have already experienced a lot of that fluctuation. And now they've been out with a frost outside as well. So I'm happy that these are ready to plant out. But for hardening off, we're looking really at anywhere between sort of 3 days and a week. If you've had yours inside, hopefully they've not been inside because that could cause them to get a bit too warm and a bit too leggy. But if they have been, then they're going to need that whole week to really get used to the differences in temperatures. Whereas if they've been in a more exposed location, then the 3 days should be absolutely fine. But you're just going to start moving them into a sheltered position on the first day, and then allow them to have more sunlight and then more wind, and then leaving them out overnight as well as the time goes on. So I have grabbed these canes. These are around 8 foot each, and now what we're going to do is be tying all 4 of these together. So we just want to wrap the string round and then also wrap it between a couple of the layers just to help it stay in place. And tie them off. And then now we've done that, we're just going to place these into the pot and just push them down so they're well supported. So the roots on these are looking really good, but we are just going to just gently loosen these up before we pop them into the pot. Just going to help the roots actually get into the pot rather than stay and continue to wrap around the same sort of area that the plug is currently in. These are 50-litre pots that I'm planting into today. They're about sort of 18-20 inches deep by about 18 inches across, and they don't need to necessarily be that deep, but the more space you have across the top is going to help us plant more of these in. So we've got the spacing of around sort of 8 to 12 inches is brilliant for these. For the dwarf varieties, that's going to be much closer together. And then we're just going to make a little hole and pop these in. Don't have to necessarily be next to the cane because we're going to add some strings in a moment, but I'm going to pop them next to the cane to make it a little bit easier. And then for a bit of added support, we're just going to grab some twine and start wrapping this around. This is just going to help it catch, and these little tassels actually get to the string and hold these plants in. Don't know what Clay thinks he's doing. Leave it. You helping, Clay? Very helpful puppy, as you can see. And then we're just going to move that about 4 inches from the last one and then keep going up as we go. Don't eat it. Thank you. No. and then just move the peas so they're going to start climbing up these strings. So for these dwarf peas, this is the Kelvin Wonder variety, our spacing is going to be quite a bit closer. So we're looking at about 6 inches for these. So we're just going to get some out and see how many we can space in here. Once again, we're going to loosen those roots as well. I'm going to choose the ones initially that have had at least 2 germinate. Any that haven't had 2 germinate, we could put a little bit closer, or just put the 2 together. I just want to start popping those in, firm them in reasonably well. These 2 are single, so I'm going to pop these 2 in together. And then next we're going to water these in before we have a look at what we can use to support them. And we just got some rainwater to water these in. It is actually going to rain tonight, so I'm not going to do this too much. I've grabbed a bunch of twigs. These are just off of actually the landai that we're cutting down, and then we're just going to start pushing these into the soil. These get to around sort of half a metre, maybe a little bit higher, so I'm just randomly popping them in, and that'll offer them some support. If you are netting, then you may find that this is going to cause issues depending on the type of netting you're using, in which case you might want to wait until they're a little bit bigger before you add some supports. And depending on the supports that you're using, they may root. So if you don't want it to root, just keep an eye on that and remove them if that becomes an issue. So that's what the dwarf ones look like. And then this is what the tall ones look like in the pot. You can see that support is really quite tall, but you would expect them to get quite a height themselves. On the very first video, we talked about covering these peas, and now at this time of the year we can really find lots of different types of weather. And at the moment, we here in Shropshire have some really nice sunny weather, so it's not necessarily that we would need to cover them at the moment. This could be different, like this time last year I would definitely be covering them, or if you're on a very exposed area or they haven't been hardened off and you're just putting them straight out under fleece, which can be done, but I wouldn't do that if you have been growing them inside. This cover is just going to really provide them with that little bit of extra warmth and help them continue growing at speed, really, rather than slow down with any shock that they might have. And all we'd want to do this is just some frost cloth, and this is some of the thicker stuff. You can also get some thinner stuff, which would work absolutely fine as well. If you've planted a whole bed of something like dwarf peas, then it might be easier for you to pop a couple of bricks beside the rows and then just wrap them completely with this cloth over the top, trying if you can to avoid this sinking down and actually touching the top of the peas, particularly if you're still experiencing some harder frosts. So for these taller peas, all I would be doing is adding the cloth around the edge, and this is folded over so it's not at full depth, and then simply popping it around like that. It would only need one run of this, so it wouldn't necessarily want to be continued to wrap round, because we want to allow plenty of light in for these peas as well. So you'd cut it down and then just peg it at the top, and that will be absolutely fine. And it still will be warmer even though we have a little bit of gap at the top. That'll be fine. And then for the dwarf peas, I would just take the sticks out and lay it over the top, and that will just give them that little bit of extra protection. For any of our pot grown peas, we are going to need to be looking at feeding these and also watering these more often. So water these in well, and then on periods where it's not raining, it's likely that you may even need to water every day on warm days or every couple of days. Just keep an eye on the weight of the pot as well, as if you can, or pop your finger into the soil and see whether or not it's getting dry. Once these peas have started to flower in our pots, then it's time to start looking at adding a feed, and at that point any liquid feed is going to be absolutely fine. I'll be using a comfrey feed for mine from the comfrey feed that we made last year. For peas that we're popping into the beds outside, so in the ground, then we are really looking at making sure that the bed has been fed before we do plant these. So mine have been fed and they've had a layer of either homemade compost or some of the bio bloom that I bought. Or we could also add some bloodfish and bone or some chicken manure pellets as a slow release fertilizer as well. So that's a good idea to add as you're planting them if you haven't done so already. And then I don't actually find that it's necessary to continue feeding any that are in the ground. If you do want to do that, however, you can just continue with a liquid feed the same as you would in pots and do that every week or two.